It is a visit shrouded in controversy and angry protests as Egypt's president arrives in Britain. But how important is Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to the West, and what about concerns over democracy and human rights? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. A visit that shows contempt for human and democratic rights. Those are the words of Britain's Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, denouncing the invitation of Egyptian leader Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to the UK. Sisi's government has been accused of what activists call grave human rights violations, and there have been protests against his visit. But Sisi has been strengthening ties with his Western counterparts, having held meetings with the leaders of France and Germany over the past year. But the timing of this visit to London is crucial. As he holds a meeting with Prime Minister David Cameron, the UK government has suspended flights to and from the Egyptian resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh. That's over fears that a bomb may have brought down a Russian plane that crashed in the Sinai Peninsula on Saturday. Well, hundreds of people joined protests outside Downing Street ahead of the Egyptian president's arrival. They say the visit should have been cancelled because of Sisi's human rights record and crackdown on dissent. Well, ahead of this visit, Downing Street issued a statement suggesting that President Sisi was vital in helping Britain's fight against ISIL. But as we mentioned earlier, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has been speaking strongly against this visit, adding that welcoming Sisi to Britain makes a mockery of government claims to be promoting peace and justice in the region. Human Rights Watch says Egypt is living through the worst human rights crisis in decades. 27 people were executed in President Sisi's first year in office. That was after 2.5 years with no executions. But that's just a fraction of the almost 550 death sentences that judges have handed out since Sisi came to power. He also expanded the jurisdiction of the military court last year. Prosecutors have referred more than 2,000 civilians for military trials since then. Several of those civilians are journalists who've been locked up and held without charges, and non-governmental organisations have been severely restricted. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our guests here in Doha, KHALIL, al-ANANI, Associate Professor at the DOHA Institute for Graduate Studies. In London, David Hurst, Editor of the Middle East Eye. And in Cairo, Marwa Maziad, Specialist in Middle East Politics and Civil Military Relations. A very warm welcome to all three of you. David Hurst, with a human rights record like that, should President Sisi be in your country?
I don't think so. I hold no brief for supporting what Jeremy Corbyn says, but I think he's right on this occasion. The key question here is Britain investing in stability in Europe and in Egypt? And there are several ways of actually breaking that down. Firstly, are British investments actually, will they go to the Egyptian people? And on the past record, we think that they will go more into the bank accounts of the Egyptian military. Because that's what's happened in the past. There's no civilian oversight of the Egyptian military budget. And on the question of human rights, Cameron's in a very, very difficult position because, you see, on Syria, he says Bashar al-Assad, a dictator who uses gas against the opposition, who uses barrel bombs, is a source of instability. He is actually the recruiting sergeant, Cameron said, of the Islamic State. However, with Sisi, who has locked up 41,000 prisoners, and of those, 323 have died in custody, either under torture or denial of medical treatment or through illness. What's going on in Egyptian prisons now must be the biggest recruiter for the IS.
So real double standards is what you're saying. I mean, how do you think he can get away with this, and who's likely to hold Britain responsible for all of these actions that you put out there?
Well, I think Cameron will regret this visit. He's been trying to play it down. As we know, there are lots and lots of protests around, and the visit itself will form a focus for all of these statistics that are pouring out. And there's a very important judicial process going on as we speak, and that is a court action in the High Court to challenge the immunity from prosecution that the Foreign Office gives their Egyptian guests. This is a very important legal case, and I think an awful lot of things will come from this visit, not at all positive for Egypt. But the central question we've all got to ask ourselves is Sisi the guarantor of stability or the source of its instability in Egypt? I mean, just to take what's happened in Sinai, there are now documented 3,600 deaths since he took over, either of civilians or 700 soldiers have been killed. Sisi started the week by telling Lise Doucet of the BBC, don't worry, I've got IS under control in Sinai. 2 days later, all flights are stopped, all British flights are stopped to Sharm el-Sheikh, when it is suspected that a bomb has been placed aboard a Russian airliner there. In what sense does he control the Sinai?
KHALIL, al-ANANI, what do you make about Sisi's visit to the UK and the real reason behind it?
Well, I think there are many reasons behind this. The first one is that Sisi is trying to enhance and strengthen his legitimacy. He knows very well that without having the Western blessing for his rule, he will lack this kind of legitimacy. Second is business. He is keen to do business with the West, particularly the influential governments like German government, like British government. And he knows very well that the West, particularly the governments, they are seeking their interests more than anything else. It's not a matter of values or principles. It's about interests. So I think he is trying to tempt them by giving them some investment opportunities, I would guess. The ironic thing here is that the Egyptian economy is dwindling and deteriorating over the last couple of weeks and months. So I think he is trying to say that...
Why is he so desperate for this legitimacy? I mean, what does he think that he can do with it?
Well, it's very important for any regime to have such Western support and backing for many reasons. One of them is that to make sure that he can rule comfortably. Second, now Egypt is part of the international community, and it has, to have a good place in this community. Plus, if he is seeking some sort of financial support coming from the international institutions like IMF or World Bank, he has to have, some sort of support from this government. So it's very important, it's very crucial to him to visit such, important countries like Britain.
And you're right, it seems that they haven't given him legitimacy by going there. Do you think it's the right thing that's been done, giving him this legitimacy, Marwan Maziad? And should he be there, considering his human rights record?
I don't think the legitimacy is any more the question after June 30th and the procedures. I mean, he is president of Egypt, so he's been on various international visits. This is one more of the same kind of. So I don't think it's a question of enforcing the legitimacy of why he's president. If we're talking about Morsi, the uprising against him, the intervention of the military for this episode, the subsequent events, we're past that. That train has left the station. The point is, if we're evaluating his presidential term as we speak, then of course there are all sorts of criticism. And human rights record is a source of criticism for any given government right now. Putin is not the greatest purveyor of human rights. Turkey's Erdogan is not. Thousands of journalists are jailed in Turkey.
Okay, but sorry, can I just jump in? I mean, we don't want to compare to a country like Turkey when it comes to human rights abuses. I mean, this is a man in 2013, the Rubber Square massacre. It's known as the largest mass killing of protesters in a single day in modern history. I mean, nobody from the military services or the government has gone to court. Something like 40,000 people have been arrested. Journalists are sitting in jail. There's real clamping out of human rights.
Okay, you're interrupting me, and I'm trying to make the point. Your previous guest rightfully positioned Egypt in the international community, and that's why the comparison in the entire Middle East is imperative. this entire Middle East is full of authoritarian trends. That's my area of expertise and research. If you're talking about Erdogan, Netanyahu, Sisi, the governments in this region is always offering one alternative and one alternative only. So in that respect, you can understand Egypt in a militarized and authoritarian region. Now, back to the point of why the British are inviting him or actually accepting this invitation and going through with it, because rightfully, as your other guest also said, business interest, 20 billion worth of dollars of British investment in Egypt. So it's the British government supporting and subsidizing its business interests. So is with the US when we're talking even about the military aid. It's $1.2 billion out of the State Department budget, not the military budget, that goes to American armed companies. So in international relations, interests are paramount. Human rights record in international relations are used as a pressuring point of negotiation and settling these relations. So, for instance, we see that Tzipi Livni and other of the Israeli cabinet are actually harassed in courts and all of that. So you see some of that as a way of pressuring another country. So my intake and approach is that it is a very regional and international dynamic, and Egypt is one among many of these players. Is that a great situation to be in? Certainly not.
Okay, so if I can jump in, can I put that to KHALIL? Do you think that's what this is all about? I mean, if you're going to pick the autocratic leaders that you want for business and stability in the region, out of all of those in the region that Ma was mentioning, he's the best of the lot?
Well, look, I think I mean, Marwa mentioned that the train of legitimacy, left the station. I think it's stuck right now. And again, Sisi is desperate to have such kind of support from the West. Look at his interviews with many of newspapers in the West, particularly in the United States. He is begging for American support. He is asking Obama always to help him and to deliver the weapons and the things that he always asking from. So we cannot, by no means, downplay the importance of having such kind of Western support. Second thing, well, this is a very Western norm, frankly, by embracing such dictator regime and authoritarian regimes. It's not the first thing to happen with Sisi. Look at Mubarak, for instance. Mubarak has been under this kind of support over the last 3 decades, but look what happened at the end of the day. I mean, he, collapsed. His regime is collapsed. So I think the West is investing in the wrong place by helping such authoritarian regime to maintain power and to repress people and to put them in prison. As David mentioned, this would fuel absolute extremism. The word stability is absolutely used in a very bad way to justify such a crackdown, to justify such repressive policies.
Okay, let me put that to Marwa. I mean, that's a valid point, isn't it? That when you have these sort of repressive policies, when you see what's happening in the Sinai region, the military wiping towns off the map, looking for Islamist militants, doesn't that in turn create more violence?
Again, as an expert on the entire Middle East and Turkey as a case, the Kurdish question has been there for 30 years.
I know we're talking about
having a region, let's compare so that we actually understand a thing or two about dynamics that are beyond that one case. To have a region within the country that is under an unrest, this is catastrophic. So same was for Turkey over the past 30 years. To have a Sinai that is restive and under all of these confrontations with the state and the police and the military even there, that's a catastrophe. But the logic is not there to say that that should be the vindication for more terrorism. Otherwise, this is exactly what the Egyptian people at the societal level, now I'm in Cairo and I'm doing research on the street. Now, the grievance they had against the Muslim Brotherhood at the time of their own uprising against them, or even grievance for an early elections. Anyway, it was a state society problem at the time. Instead of solving it, or instead of dealing with that backlash from society, the point was like twisting the people's arm by saying, well, the terrorism will end in Sinai if Morsi comes back. Having that kind of chip of negotiation of extremism, explosion, terrorism, against the restoration of a president against whom he was elected and he came in office, but there was another uprising against him.
Discussion, frankly.
I would like to push it on, actually, and David, bring you in. I mean, whatever Egyptians and those on the international stage think of Sisi, he is there in Britain right now. What do you think he can achieve? We know that he's going to be talking about security. It's very important now, considering that plane that has gone down in Sinai. What can be done with him, having him there facing David Cameron?
Well, that's an extremely good question, because really, and I'd like other people to answer this question, what leverage has been exercised over Sisi by all the donors? Now, Saudi Arabia gave a lot of money to the coup originally. It is now pulling back. It only gave 6 billion in the latest tranche, and that was not, I understand, money. It was a loan. The Saudis are certainly pulling back. What has Obama achieved, or what will Cameron achieve by investing so much money, or BP, for instance, in Sisi's regime? Will they be able to curb the inherent violence of the regime? And the military coup was an act of violence. You actually got rid of not just one election, but 5 of them.
Okay, but going back to the security aspects, I mean, Egypt
locked up most of the political politicians.
Egypt is an important player regionally, isn't it? Considering their relationship with one of the governments in Libya, what's happening in Yemen, you can see why it would make sense to bring Egypt on as a strategic partner in a fashion.
Well, Libya is a good example because Egypt has been actually trying right from the start to start an intervention there. They allowed the UAE planes to bomb Tripoli, again in the name of terrorism, by saying that the Misratans, for instance, were supporting terrorism. They're a source of instability, and the instability of Libya has started. On the other front, there's this absolute argument that Egypt is now the biggest supporter of the Camp David Agreement and of Israel. However, from Israel's point of view, what they get basically are jihadis on both the Golan Heights now and also in Sinai. So even if you're looking at it from the point of view of a completely detached observer in the region, would you choose Egypt as or Sisi's Egypt as a source of stability? Now, previously, Egypt played an extremely important role in, for instance, in organising a truce in the Gaza war. The role that Egypt plays now with Gaza, if anyone is interested in the Palestinians here, is basically to enforce a tighter siege on its border, on the Rafah border, by destroying all the tunnels and by basically bulldozing one half of Rafah, than the Israelis are. Now, is that in the interest of peace? I can't see it. I can't see Egypt as a regional source of stability.
Okay, let me put that to you, Khalil. I mean, can he make a difference? Isn't it better to have somebody, you might not agree with their human rights record, but isn't it better to have them in the same room discussing a growing concern?
I don't think so. I think investing in Sisi is really the wrong investment. I would say, as David mentioned, he is a source of instability. He is a sort of chaos, frankly. Look at his performance over the last year and a half since he took power until now, or even since he was in power, since the coup on July 3rd, 2013 until now, because he was, the real actor behind the coup. Look at the political aspect, for instance. Egypt had elections over the last, I would say, couple of weeks, and look at the turnout in these elections. Very low turnout. And this would absolutely reflect the sentiment of, I would say, despair and resentment of Egyptians and anger that they don't trust the ballot box would reflect their real will, because they tried ballot box before and they got military rule. The second thing, look at the economic side, for instance. Egyptian pound is, lost a lot of its value since Sisi came to power until now. Look at the projects that he spoke about. Sisi spoke about large and huge projects for investments and in development. Nothing happened. Alexandria is sinking in this kind of rain with no infrastructure. Look at security, for instance. If the reports about what happened with the Russian plane is true, this would be absolutely disastrous for Egyptian security, because this means that Egypt cannot protect its own airports. This would absolutely destroy the tourism industry in Egypt. So look at these indications and you can find the answer. This person, this man is not the source of stability. It's absolutely the opposite.
Marwa, I'd like to go back to the call for his arrest and what is being made of that, considering the state of immunity in the UK. I mean, many are saying that because he was involved in the coup, that he shouldn't have this immunity. What is your response? And what are the concerns?
I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay, David?
Okay, well, I've had more dealings with that particular case. There are two legal planks. One is under what's called universal jurisdiction of the British courts. This is the obligation of British courts to enforce international law when it comes to very, very gross crimes. We're talking about crimes against humanity, torture. Now, there's a second plank, which is a British domestic legislation, which is one particular section of one particular act, which basically says that a British court can try anyone accused of torture anywhere in the world, and that is a British offence, right? Now, to forestall either of these two legal planks, what's been happening is that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has issued, each time an Egyptian guest has arrived, what's called special mission immunity, which means that because of the need to promote international relations, we have to talk to people, even people who may be accused of gross human rights. He has immunity. Now, that immunity at the moment is being challenged in the courts by a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Lord MacDonald, who was one of those who started a procedure, a whole war crimes procedure, when he was Director of Public Prosecutions, and it's very serious, it's very weighty, it's going to be a long legal battle, and it's going to have really big implications. Okay. Just 2 weeks before this visit, the Sisi's Chief of Staff, Hegazi, turned up here as the guest of the Ministry of Defence, and he was given special mission immunity. Now, that is being challenged in the court. So there's a legal battle going on, which is very, very important for human rights. It's also very important because the human rights side of this argument suggests that this special immunity is being given out like confetti. It's a political decision. It's got nothing to do with law.
So, Khalil, clearly an important trip for a myriad of reasons, but all the countries who've been entertaining him, who are also involved in the fight against ISIL, must be concerned seeing what's just happened in the Sinai.
Well, absolutely, that's true. I mean, no one can ignore what's happening in the region. The region is really, falling apart. Look at what's happening in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya. However, what's happening right now in Egypt can absolutely push the country towards one of these countries' fate. I mean, we can end up at the same position, the same situation, that we have such polarized society, divided society, without having such strong and legitimate government, I would say. This is absolutely the main source of instability. And I would say this visit absolutely is driven by a very short-sighted vision from Cameron's government. And I think there is a lot of support coming out from the Sisi regime's sponsors, particularly in the Gulf, who are putting a lot of money behind this visit, trying to convince the West to accept this man and tell the West, look, this is the strong man in Egypt that can bring stability again, which is absolutely untrue. If you look at the reality on the ground, and absolutely the opposite. So I think, despite what's happening in the region, I'm afraid that what's happening right now in Egypt might push the country towards, what's happening either in Syria or Libya or Yemen in the long term.
And of course, he may surprise us. Thank you very much to all of my guests with me here in Doha, Khalil al-ANANI in London, David Hurst, and in Cairo, Marwa Maziat. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programme's page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. Thank you very much for watching. From me, Jane Dutton, the rest of the team, goodbye.